private parts and religious anxiety. What was the understanding of sexuality and nudity when Genesis was compiled, some 2,600 years ago? Genesis 1 verses 27 and 28. And God created man in his own image. In the image of God created him. Male and female created them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply. Genesis 2 verses 23 to 25. And they were both naked, Adam and his wife, and they were not ashamed. Despite the divine blessing of sexual relations according to Genesis chapter 1, and the nakedness of which they were not ashamed, according to the account in Genesis chapter 2, it can be stated that both early Jewish and Christian interpretations of biblical literature are far removed from the initial understanding and vision of those accounts. Later interpretations have increasingly privileged the metaphorical and abstract over the poetic and corporeal, thus distancing, on a large scale, the sacred from the all-too-human realities of sexuality. This distortion by theologians is only one episode in the long history of a fierce Christian hostility to sex and the private parts. Thus, one can conclude that the opposition between the sexualized body and the divine is deeply rooted in ancient Jewish and Christian cultures and their corresponding theological interpretations and negotiations. In particular, it was Augustine of Hippo, also known as Saint Augustine, who advanced the doctrine of original sin, a doctrine that endures to the present day. Some authors perceive Augustine's doctrine as directed against human sexuality. It should be kept in mind that Western civilizations are basically a legacy of the Greco-Roman world in terms of social organization, philosophy, and law, with a powerful mixture of Judaism and Christianity. This historical mixture contained incompatible elements. Individual freedom was cherished, but great emphasis was placed on law and the proper procedure of submission. The polytheism of Greeks and Romans clashed with Judeo-Christian monotheism, and the sexual permissiveness of Hellenistic times was contested by the anti-sexuality of early Christianity. As far as sexuality was concerned, Christianity was definitely the most influential factor. While other vital aspects of human life, such as government, property rights, kinship, and economics, were influenced to varying degrees, sexuality was singled out as belonging almost entirely to the domain of religion. This development arose from an ascetic concept shared by various religious branches, thus aroused the concept of the good spiritual world in opposition to the evil, carnal, materialistic world and the struggle between the spirit and the flesh. Since sex personifies the flesh, it was obviously the enemy of the spirit. However, it is interesting to note that this position was to some degree challenged in the Renaissance era. For example, the Risen Christ is a masterpiece of Renaissance spirituality. It was carved in marble by the famous Michelangelo, full name Michelangelo di Lodovico Buonarroti Simoni. The sculpture unabashedly depicts the genitals of Jesus, completely nude, until 1546 when he was fitted with a striking bronze loincloth that concealed his penis and testicles. For too many, the genitals were spiritually and morally dangerous, so they had to be hidden. Michelangelo also created other masterpieces of art in that Renaissance era, such as the paintings in the Sistine Chapel, in particular the monumental fresco of the Last Judgment, between 1534 and 1542. Originally, the fresco showed much of a crowd of writhing figures exposing their genitals and buttocks. Art that was, to some degree, disguised by the addition of billowing draperies and fragile pants painted years later, in 1565. Regarding the huge fresco about to be finished, the poet Pietro Aretino was horrified. He told him in a letter he wrote to Michelangelo in 1545, "Your art should be in some erotic brothel, certainly not in the grandest chapel in the world." The papal master of ceremonies, Biagio of Cesena, is also said to have exclaimed, "All those figures are showing their nudity so shamelessly." Michelangelo mocked the master of ceremonies by portraying him inside the huge fresco as the figure of Minos, who was the judge of Hades, judge of what is understood as hell. When the master complained to Pope Paul III to be erased from the fresco, He told the Pope, "Holiness, have me taken out of there." The Pope replied, "Get out of hell." If he had painted you in purgatory, I would have done everything in my power to free you. But you know that there is no redemption from hell.
But let's drop the humor. Returning to the main theme, what we wish to establish is that religions with their dogmas and doctrines, particularly coercive and repressive religions, have infused and affected human minds with great negativity. They have created, to a superlative degree, a taboo of everything related to sexuality. From childhood, the minds of youngsters have been repressed and modulated to display an adversity to sexuality and to distort everything related to it. The influence of these doctrines remains strong even after adulthood and despite the abandonment of religion. According to experiences reported by adult women, they continue to have extreme shadows and distortions about their sexual preferences and to have persistent feelings of guilt about sex. Not only is this the product of inhibitions, maladaptive attitudes, and ignorance induced socially by religion, but it is also the product of sexual myths maintained by society and religion. This distortion seems to reach women more fully, for when they have been religiously indoctrinated even before puberty, an influential anomaly has been created in their minds and subconscious. Experts label this anomaly as sexual frigidity or psychosexual dysfunction. Psychosexual disorders are defined as sexual problems of psychological origin that occur in the absence of any pathological disease. Psychosexual dysfunction. The U.S. National Library of Medicine published in 2010 an article entitled "The History of Female Sexual Dysfunction as a Mental Disorder in the 20th Century." The article provides an overview of conceptualizations of female sexual problems and female sexual dysfunction in particular throughout the 20th century, especially in relation to psychiatry and mental illness. A person who has difficulty or trouble becoming sexually aroused or feeling sexual satisfaction may be suffering from a mental or emotional condition called psychosexual dysfunction. Mental or emotional causes of this condition, according to the University of Virginia Medical Center, include depression, anxiety, traumatic sexual experience, abuse or rape, feelings of guilt, stress, negative body image. It should be noted that coercive religion creates, particularly in children, anxiety, frustration, and guilt. Also creates a negative body image and a completely repressed view of sexuality. An affected adult may benefit from psychotherapy, sex therapy, and behavioral therapy. 1. Psychotherapy allows you to work with a psychiatrist, psychologist, social worker, or licensed counselor to find ways to cope with stressful or painful problems. 2. Sex therapy helps you with communication, teaches you about sexual fantasies, and helps you focus on sexual stimuli. 3. Behavioral therapy consists of a psychiatrist, psychologist, social worker, or licensed counselor helping you unlearn automatic behaviors. Any religion that takes the Bible as an infallible, inspired scripture and as the final authority for human behavior and morality becomes guilty of despicable indoctrination of the individual who submits to it. The main characters that have influenced the development of so-called Christianity, Jesus and Paul, were apocalyptic prophets who were certain of the imminent arrival of the end of the age and the intervention of their God that never happened. The advice they gave related to marriage, the flesh, and sexuality was completely extremist out of the context of the proximity of that end that never came. That advice, for the most part, was obsolete after their predictions never came to pass, and they are even more obsolete in our day. However, religions continue to revive those extremist dogmas and reimpose all the indoctrination of past apocalyptic prophets. Here are some passages in the Bible that have contributed to distort and even ruin the sex lives of their adherents. Matthew 19:12. There are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Whoever is able to receive this, let him receive it. According to Luke, Jesus had warned of the futility of sexual reproduction because disaster was coming. Luke 21:23. Woe to those who are pregnant and to those who breastfeed in those days, for there will be great distress in the land and wrath against this people. Romans 8:13. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die, but if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the flesh, you will live. Galatians 5:17. For the flesh lusteth against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. Galatians 6:8. For he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall reap life everlasting. 1 Corinthians 7:29. But this I say, brethren, that the time is short. Let them which have wives be as though they had none. The sacred and the horny cannot and should not mix. Conclusion. Religion has caused and continues to cause much harm to humans who have been indoctrinated by its dogmas and theologies. These doctrines continue to be used, especially at the societal level, to stifle human development, understanding, and freedom. Unfortunately, people who have been affected by these doctrines are unintentionally guilty of the destruction of many marriages. Marriages that could have survived if married life had not been subjected to the aberrations of sexual understanding and aversions to it, imposed on the mind, consciousness, and subconsciousness of individuals by the religions to which they have belonged. Definitely seeking help in psychotherapy, sex therapy, and behavioral therapy could be the key to get rid of that psychosexual dysfunction imposed by religious teachings.